Hello, everyone, and thank you guys so much for joining us on our Friday weekly webinar. Today, we're going to be discussing employment immigration and what you need to know about the H-1B visa. A really fun and interesting topic, and luckily we have our guest speaker today, our managing attorney, Ruby Powers. A little bit on our attorney here. She's been licensed since 2008. Founded the firm in November 2009, is a board certified immigration attorney, and is also an author on the weekends. Thank you for all that you do, Attorney Powers, and I'll let you take it away with your learning objectives for today.
Thank you so much. I am here to tell you about the H-1B because you know what? It's almost H-1B season, and I'm hoping you're all having a great New Year's Eve, and you're probably not thinking about H-1Bs, but you can watch us whenever you want to. And so we are here to tell you about what you need to know to get prepared. It's always a good time to be thinking about this, and because the season is in early 2022. So the learning objectives are what is an H-1B? We're going to talk a little bit about the requirements and the documents that normally are required, just so that you can get ahead if this is something that you want to pursue. And this is a really great webinar, whether you are an employer looking to hire somebody for the H-1B, or if you are someone who's looking to get hired on and be sponsored with an H-1B. Also, I always say this, but this doesn't take the place of legal advice. This is more informative, and we definitely suggest that you have a consultation. So we're having this in December 2021, and the new season opens up, well, I'll explain it, but in the spring of 2022 to start October 2022 in the fiscal year 2023. So lots of numbers, a little confusing, but basically, if you're wanting to play in the H-1B lottery registration process of 2022 start dates, this is what you should be listening to. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So what is an H-1B visa? So it applies to employers seeking to hire non-immigrant aliens. Unfortunately, that's the word that was in the INA, but basically immigrants as workers in specialty occupations, or as fashion models of distinguished merit and ability. Specialty occupations, important to note, is one that requires the application of a body of highly specialized knowledge. So this is where it can sort of separate a lot of positions from others. So we have to make sure we meet this requirement, and the attainment of at least a bachelor's degree or its equivalent. So if you're looking to hire someone for a position that doesn't require a bachelor's, then this wouldn't work. But maybe you do need a bachelor's, you just don't realize it. So these are some of the conversations, but it's not just about if you want to have a bachelor's B requirement to try to meet these H-1B requirement, it also needs to be comparable to the in-market industry and also the Department of Labor guidelines. The intent of the H-1B provisions is to help employers who cannot otherwise obtain needed business skills and abilities from the U.S. workforce by authorizing the temporary employment of qualified individuals who are not otherwise authorized to work here in the United States. And as we've seen, as people say, the Great Resignation or the labor shortage or the labor reshuffle, or even just all the consults that I've had with lots of business owners, H-1B, I think season is going to be very hot in 2022. So you want to get a head start on this. So let me go to some of the general requirements just to make sure of this before I go through the process. So you have to have offered the offered position is located in the United States. The position requires a minimum of a bachelor's degree. The prospective employee must possess the required degree or its equivalent, along with the other required qualifications. So if the intended employee had their bachelor's here in the US, no problem. You've got that, you can check that off your list. But if you had a bachelor's or equivalent in another country, you're going to have to get an evaluation. That can take maybe a few days, a week, or whatever, depending on peak times. So that's another thing to consider to get done in advance of when you will need this. So if you're like, what should I do while I'm waiting to get closer to that date, then that would be something you can do. And it would be wonderful if you have that before you have a consultation, so that way we know that that is not a concern that we have to be worried about to make sure that you actually qualify for this. And the company must pay the offered salary, which meets or exceeds the prevailing wage. Prevailing wage it's very important. We have to be able to determine what is the prevailing wage. We look to the job description and title. We look to the location the job will be done. And we look at, there's the 4 different tiers of that salary range. And so we have to take a look at all of those aspects. And that's another part we do when we're screening the employee-employer situation for whether or not they qualify, is making sure we know what is the prevailing wage and is the employer willing to pay that. And if there's a disconnect, we have to see if that's something that's workable. If not, then we won't be able to proceed. So just some of the documents that you will be needing, and if you hire us or whomever you hire, they give you a list of documents and things to collect. So just to give you an idea, so educational documents. So like if you had, whether you had the degree here in the US or abroad, you're still going to be able to show the transcripts or the evaluation, or the evaluation if it was abroad, but the diplomas, the transcripts, things like that to verify that degree. Professional experience, so that would be important to show that you do have the experience to do the job, and or if you need to show that you have the equivalent of experience to meet or supplement the education, that would be another aspect. So that resume, CV, letters of recommendation, all those would be great, and immigration documents. So it's really important that if you ever were in the US, you were always in status, you never overstayed. Very, very important. So your I-94, your Form I-20, that you maintain that valid passport, visas, all the immigration approval notices, those are all very important to us as we prepare. So, okay, let's walk back a little step or two. So you're an employer and you're like, I really need somebody. I'm going to go out there and look for somebody. Then you have a consult after you've watched this webinar, and then we try to talk a little bit more about the details about maybe what that prevailing wage will be, some of the things that you'd be looking for when you're looking to hire somebody to make that match. Or let's say you're an employee, a prospective employee, and you're wanting to be sponsored by someone here in the United States. Then you could have a consult with us beforehand, and we can let you know, go in a little bit more detail about your specific situation, education, and considerations. And then once you find your match, you can come back to us, and then we can double check that everything is A-okay, and before we proceed. Once we know that we have the strategy, we would give you a contract and get started. And we would have dual representation, representing the employer and the employee, and we would move forward. One of the biggest important things to note is that the first step, once we've done all that strategy, the first actually proactive step of moving forward is we would do the electronic registration. Now, we like to do the registration for our clients, but if you want to, you can do it on your own. Just need to make sure it's done right. And this was implemented in 2020. And time, I don't know if it's just me, but COVID sort of threw me off on timing. But anyway, it used to not be done like this. Before, we had to submit everything and hope that we got chosen in the lottery. But this was a change. I'm pretty sure, yes, it was in 2020. And what you do is you submit the electronic registration. So it's basically like saying, hey, I want to play in the H-1B lottery system. Can I be chosen, please? And you would submit some of that information. And then if you will find out, you're given a timeline of when you can submit this. Generally, it is in early March that you would submit this, and then there's like a few week window, and then they'll pull all the numbers, then they tell you if you won or if you're chosen from the registration, and then they'll tell you when to submit it. But normally the very first wave starts April 1st of that year. So for example, if we've done the strategy and we know we want to move forward and we're doing the registration for you, then we would need to have all the information prepared so that we could file the registration in early March once it opens up. And then we would wait till that date that they pull the numbers, find out if we've made it or not. And if we did, we would proceed with finalizing the rest of the packet so that we could submit it and wait to get a decision. So that's more or less the process to get the first step. And if you're not chosen, then you cannot proceed with applying under the CAP process. So if you want to do the H-1B Cap subject petitions, then you must first electronically register, like I mentioned, and then you can move forward if you are chosen. Now, I've been talking a lot about the CAP, but the CAP is what we normally see. But if a person is working for a nonprofit, like schools, qualified schools and educators, hospitals, certain groups that qualify for it to be CAP exempt, you do not have to go through the CAP process. So what's great about that is that you don't have to wait for the specific time. You could apply to change status to an H-1B any time of the year if you're CAP exempt. Now, one thing to note is that if you are an employee and you go from a non-CAP position to a CAP position, then you will have to go through the CAP process later to be in a CAP position. You can go from non-CAP to non-CAP. You can go from CAP to non-CAP, but you can't go from non-CAP to CAP without going through the registration process. Might have to play that slowly again, but to make sure anyway, I can explain that in the consult. So the petition process is that we would have to do, the employer agent would submit the LCA to the Department of Labor, and then once we have that, we can move forward. Now that can take a couple of weeks, sometimes during peak times, and so that's something that we really want to make sure that we don't wait till the last minute to do. And then we need to prepare the I-129 to submit to USCIS. And then you also, this has changed over year to year, but normally you're allowed to pay the premium processing to get a decision within about 3 business weeks. And that filing fee is $2,500. So if you want to know more immediately what the answer is, and that's understandable, so you can make plans accordingly, then you just pay the $2,500 for that. That's in addition to the normal filing fee for the I-129. Now, so we've done all of this. We got chosen the registration. We submitted the H-1B. Let's say we did the premium processing. We found out within a few weeks, yay, we got chosen. So that's great. But if we're in the CAP, it doesn't get started until October 1st of that year. So we're talking about October 1st, 2022. So what do you do in the meantime? Well, there are some options about gap options where people who have a visa that are allowed to be here, like they were an F1 and they need a gap through that summer to stay here on their OPT until they start October 1st. So that is something we can discuss in the consult to whether you're eligible for that. But for the most part, you might be in some other status, and then you would have to change to make sure that change went through to make sure that you could start October 1st in H-1B, but you wouldn't be able to start working in the H-1B until October 1st, unless you're eligible for you're on OPT, for example, or you're doing the CAP. Otherwise, you could be applying and you're abroad. And so that means that you would have your I-129 approved, you'd make a consulate appointment, and you would be able to come here to the United States after that appointment, when you're getting your stamp to come here to the US and start working. So consulates have been low staffed in those during COVID and the last couple of years as well. So, that can cause delay. You want to plan accordingly so that you don't have that type of delay. So how long can you stay here? Well, you can usually you're having 3 years at a time, up to 6 years. There are ability to do an extension. That extension, it requires that you have a green card pending, but we can go into that later. But the great thing about those 6 years is that, that's a lot of time to be able to see maybe the employer is willing to sponsor you for a green card. And the other thing to note about the H-1B is it's a dual intent visa, which means that it can have the if you move towards a green card, that's fine because it has immigrant and non-immigrant intent. It's one of few visas like that. So that can be very helpful. But ideally in those 6 years, if your employer or someone's going to petition for you, or you're going to self-petition maybe with a national interest waiver, you will have had enough time to do so. After those 6 years, if you don't have a petition or can't switch to another visa of some sort, if you whatever the situation may be, you would have to leave, and you won't be able to do another H-1B unless you're outside of the country for 1 year to reset that H-1B clock. You also can recapture time from the time in which you're gone from the country. So at some point, like on your last extension, you would want to include proof of the time that you've been out of the country and ask for some more time on your H-1B. So your employer will be liable for a reasonable cost of your return. If the employer terminates your employment before the end of the period of authorized stay, your employer is not responsible for the cost of your return if you voluntarily resign. So this will be in part of the agreement that you have with them. And like we mentioned earlier, this cap, unfortunately, there's only a certain amount of visas available for this type of visa. It has 65,000 each fiscal year, and the fiscal year is from October 1st till the end of September of every year. It seems a little weird, right? Because I think a lot of times we think January to December, we think summer to summer, but the fiscal year for the government starts October 1st. So anyway, there's an additional 20,000 for beneficiaries with a master's degree or higher from a U.S. institution. So some individuals move forward into getting a master's from the U.S. to have that extra opportunity and bite at the apple possibility. So, as we mentioned, so let's just go into the finer detail. Those who are petitioned or employed at an institution of higher education or its affiliated or related nonprofit entities, a nonprofit research organization, or a government research organization are not subject to this numerical cap. It might think that they're cap exempt, but you need to double check that they're cap exempt just because of structural entities and things like that. But that can be very beneficial for someone who wants to apply anytime during the year and not have to go through this lottery registration process. Now, other thing to note is that the H-1B is the primary person. Their spouse is called an H-4, and they are they're only, so this has been flux over the last couple of years whether or not H-4s are allowed to work. But that is something that has been given at some point only once the green card process had been started and has been taken away under the Mass administration, and so this has been in flux. And so at the time of the the recording or when you watch it, it's definitely best to double check what is going on in this very, very fickle area that is very important. We really are strong supporters of H-4s being able to have work authorization, but unfortunately, predominantly through history, they have not been able to, with very few exceptions. So also children under 21 and unmarried are also allowed to be on the dependents of this visa. And so if a child is about to age out, you want to be having a conversation as to what we're going to do with them in terms of their immigration status if we're not able to get a green card for them before they turn 21, or what we call age out in the industry. So, that might have been a lot of information, but I wanted to make sure that you have a good grasp of this process. And so really what the best thing to be doing in about January and February is making sure that you have a consultation to go through, have the resume, have the evaluation, get the estimated prevailing wage concept figured out, and so that you can make that arrangement to move forward. And then that way you can be contracted to make sure that you're ready to register and go forward in a timely manner. You don't want to do this last minute because a lot of attorneys are going to be doing this all at the same time, and we don't want any mistakes, and you want to make sure that you can be at peace with having done the best you can in a timely manner, because we know this happens every year. And so therefore we're getting ready for it.